superfans. Where do the reports come from? Did you get an initial?
Whoa. Stop the music. Literally, as I'm getting this podcast set to post, breaking news occurs that Cam Newton has signed with my favorite team, the New England Patriots. I'm a little bit shocked by this news. And obviously, all of these division previews have been pre-recorded before this news actually occurred. It does change the landscape, especially of the AFC East, slightly, but not really. And we actually do talk a little bit about that on this particular preview, even before we knew the news was going to happen. I will add a few extra thoughts when we get to the New England Patriots in this same sort of breaking into the podcast fashion. But for now, let's start the music over and get back to the AFC East division preview.
That's how we start! Yeah, baby!
32 superfans.
Where do the reports come from? Did you get an initial?
One PodVader.
That's football.
Every angle of the NFL covered.
All that kind of stuff, I get it.
This
No question about it.
is Next Fan Up.
We're going to unleash hell here in December.
Hello and welcome back to the Next Fan Up podcast. Did you miss me? Hey everybody, it's PodVader here. I know it's been a while. And that you'd think during this pandemic, everybody else had all this extra time. No, I actually had to work more for less money. And honestly, I'm still working more for less money. I'm just sneaking this stuff in when I get an opportunity, which is not very often. But my son's got a job now, so I'm spending I got a little more free time, and that's where this free time is being spent. We've got we couldn't leave you without having a season preview. I mean, this is our 6th year of covering the league here on Next Fan Up. And so I had to make sure that we put in the season previews, and everybody loves my season game-by-game predictions because, quite honestly, they are the most accurate game-by-game predictions in all the land. Just ask James, our Eagles superfan. Hello, James.
Hey, Pod, I wouldn't wholeheartedly agree with that. Your final outcomes, okay, I'll give you that. Your game-by-game predictions,
This season, just to let everybody know, I have instituted a new concept to my game-by-game predictions. I've always said that I had like a plus or minus 3 or 4 or 5 games whenever I did my records, which obviously, I mean, if you've got a plus minus of 5, I mean, that's the difference between a losing team with the first pick in the draft or an 8-8 mediocre team, or a mediocre team and a Super Bowl contender team if it's a plus or minus 5 games. That's ridiculous. So this season, I've actually instituted locks. I've made picks for every team that I believe are a lock win and a lock loss, so that you sort of get an idea of where the ceiling is for the team and where the floor is for the team. And I think by looking at this in that sort of lens, because let's face it, game-by-game predictions before rosters have even been decided. There have been injuries that have occurred already in the offseason, even though there have been no mini camps. All of these things are going to have an effect. And once training camp starts, and who knows how training camp is actually going to be happening, even though you're probably listening to some of these while training camp is actually happening, all of these things are going to come to effect, and they're going to change the outcome of all of these predictions. But based on when I am recording these, this is how I feel about the upcoming NFL season. All right, so why don't we just jump into these game-by-game predictions? And James has been blessed to join me as we go down this journey. We will start based on my predictions with the worst team in the AFC East, and that is welcome to New York Jets. That's right. I thought you might have thought I was going to say another new team, but no, it's the New York Jets. I may be, unfortunately, a little bit biased on this, James. I've got the Jets finishing the season at 3-13. No lock victories for them, but 4 lock losses. And I was talking with my father-in-law, who is undoubtedly a Jets hater, but he's a Giants fan. He's not a Patriots fan. He actually is a Patriots hater as well. But he hates the Jets. And we were talking, and he told me the Jets can't even field a team good enough to play in high school, never mind the NFL. Well, I think that's a little bit of hyperbole. I do kind of agree with him. That roster is shambles, and Jamal Adams is not happy.
No, he's not happy. And at the time that we're recording this, he is trying to force a trade out of Gotham. So I don't know what's going on there. Based on what we covered in the draft podcast and some of the moves they've made so far this offseason, the key thing that they really needed to fix they haven't addressed yet, which is offensive line. I mean, yeah, they drafted 2 tackles. They haven't done much in free agency, but for Sam Darnold to grow, to get more production out of Le'Veon Bell, you need 5 guys consistently up front who can slow down the defensive rush or pressure. And they've done neither of those things in any way that would give a Jets fan confidence.
I mean, Mekhi Becton is not going to solve all your ills on the offensive line. It's a good piece and a good start, but they brought in guard Alex Lewis from Baltimore, Connor McGovern's the center from Denver, and then they have Brian Winters and Chuma Edga on the right side of the line. Greg Van Rotten from Carolina is a backup tackle. I may have mispronounced his last name on purpose. And George Fant is also brought in as a free agent from Seattle. Seattle offensive line. I think I've said enough. That is really the biggest key here for Sam Darnold, who has literally no weapons. Le'Veon Bell and Frank Gore are going to have difficulty finding holes to run through. Chris Herndon, if he can stay healthy and stay out of trouble, perhaps could become that weapon for Sam Darnold again. But when you're looking at your wide receiving core of Brashad Perriman, rookie Denzel Mims, and Jamison Crowder, Josh Doxson is also in there, and maybe New England cast-off Braxton Berrios. I mean, there's not a lot to be afraid of on the offensive side of the ball with the New York Jets.
Not at all. And even if he does have time to throw, which last year he didn't when he was healthy and playing, like you said, that receiving core doesn't scare anybody. In average secondary, I'm not going to say would have their way, but they could pretty much keep that in check. So, yeah, 4 wins, and they may luck into 5.
Now, if Jamal Adams, decides he is going to play this season and wants to contribute to the New York Jets, right up the middle is honestly a strength for the New York Jets. You have Quinnen Williams, Steve McClendon on your defensive line, along with Henry Anderson. Your linebackers are Harvey Lange, CJ Mosley, if he can be healthy, Blake Cashman, Jordan Jenkins. Maybe a little weak there on the linebacking side of the but you have Pierre Desir and Arthur Mallet as your corners. Again, you're a little weak there, but Jamal Adams and Marcus May, again, talking right up the middle. Jamal Adams, Marcus May, CJ Mosley, Quinnen Williams. You're looking pretty strong on defense. You have a good core to build around, but you got to keep that core intact. And obviously, you got to make your captain happy.
Yeah, well, right now, like I said, captain's not happy. I mean, and this probably stems back to last year when he was rumored to be on the trading block early on in the season, when another team in this division was basically having a fire sale on all its talent. It's a shambles. And, this is one of those things that starts with management before it even gets down to coaching. And the way this team is currently constructed, okay, you've got your quarterback of the future playing now, but you haven't given him much support on either side of the ball. A defense that pretty much doesn't scare anybody as far as stopping them consistently. And like we already mentioned, offense doesn't have much to offer as far as putting up points. I mean, they barely averaged 16, 17 points per game last year on offense, and defensively gave up 21 per. It's not necessarily a recipe for victory.
The Jets, as I mentioned, I see only 3 victories. That's week 4 against the Broncos. Week 9, they host the Patriots. And week 12, they host the Dolphins. Now, I don't normally, when I'm doing my locks, I don't normally like to lock in division games. Division games a little bit different than a regularly scheduled game, just because these teams know each other so well. They play against each other twice a year. Even when there are changes, there aren't really that many changes to what the team does, especially if they haven't changed anything offensively. But I have locked in a loss for the Jets week 1 at the Bills. I think that's just, I mean, when both teams are up for the first game of the season and you're talking about the Bills versus the Jets, I think it's pretty obvious why I would lock in the Bills in that particular position. Week 8, I have locked in a loss at Kansas City. I think that one's pretty obvious. We'll obviously talk about Kansas City when we get to the AFC West. I've locked in a loss at the Seahawks in week 14. Again, I don't think I need to explain too much there. And in week 17, I have locked in a loss at the Patriots. Again, New England, and we'll be talking about them in a moment. I see some troubles ahead for New England, but I also know that Belichick is the type of coach that will make sure he will not end the season on a down note to the best of his ability. Obviously, last season being last season. But I don't see a way that the Patriots hosting the Jets in Foxborough are going to lose that particular game. And so that's where I come up with the 3-13, 4 locks. I mean, honestly, that is a big swing. That means that there are 12 other games that could honestly go either way. But I mean, the end of the season for the Jets is where I see things really coming off the rails with a 5-game losing streak starting week 13. Raiders, at Seahawks, Rams, Browns, and then at the Patriots.
Yeah, definitely not a good sign for anyone keeping their job at the end of the year.
Let's move to the team that will finish 3rd in this division, according to my predictions. And that will be the team with a new quarterback in their midst, and that is the Miami Dolphins. I really wanted to move the Miami Dolphins up a little bit because I do think that they've made some positive moves, but ultimately, again, when you look at the roster, there's nothing on the Dolphins roster that I go, oh yeah, that's a scary team, because there's not. And even if you're talking about Tua Tagovailoa as like your future quarterback, we're still talking about your future. We're not talking about this year. It is very rare for the rookie quarterback to come in and have a winning season, never mind a franchise-changing season in their first year.
Yeah, definitely not the case here for Tua. We know that Fitzpatrick will start the year whenever it does start. Whether he'll finish the year based on how well or bad the Dolphins are playing is up in the air, but, you know, they stuck with Fitzpatrick even through the helter-skelter part of their season last year and still managed to finish the season on, a 4-game win streak, including my beloved Eagles. But I kind of like what they did here, especially in the draft, because they went defense-heavy pretty much from the second round on. Raekwon Davis from Alabama, Brandon Jones, safety from Texas, a couple of defensive ends in Stowbridge from North Carolina, Weaver from Boise State. I know these are day 3 guys, but, you know, every little bit helps. This is a team that pretty much was number 1 in the league last year as far as giving up points at 31 a game. So that's a big area where they need to improve before we even get into the offense.
Well, let's talk a little bit. Yeah, let's talk about a little bit about that defense then, because as we look at their projected starting lineup, I use the rlads.com for their NFL depth charts. I do feel like they are some of the more, if they're not accurate, they're at least very informative. Shaq Lawson, Davon Godchow, Christian Wilkins, those are your 3 your 3 projected starting defensive linemen. It's a strong defensive line, quite honestly. And then behind them, you're looking at Vince, I'm guessing Bagel at right outside linebacker. It could be between him and Andrew Van Ginkel, Raekwon McMillan, Landon Roberts, and Kyle Van Noy. They obviously stole some Patriots to fix their linebacking core.
Well, I mean, it is a former Patriot assistant as the head coach. That's only natural.
Also got your favorite linebacker, Camus Grugier-Hill, who I know you're super high on.
Super high that he's gone.
Now, their secondary is fairly strong. Xavier Howard, Byron Jones, Eric Rowe playing safety now, Bobby McCain at free safety. The problem is they don't have a lot of depth behind it, although you mentioned Brandon Jones was drafted at the safety position. So, they have some pieces on the defensive side that could make some noise.
Absolutely. And, they shouldn't be worse than the league as far as points this year. The head coach is a defensive specialist. I know you probably question that because you say that he was not the coordinator when he was hired. He was just an assistant. But I'm not that down on
Mr. Flores. I actually like Mr. Flores. I don't think I've ever said that he wasn't the coordinator. As a matter of fact, I think the difference between the defense that we saw for the Patriots last year to the previous year shows that Mr. Flores had a strong influence on the defense the previous year, which stunk, by the way.
But I mean, these are all good moves. I'm hopeful for their defense. And that's probably about as far as I can go because you can't get any worse than, last as far as giving up points. The only place to go is up. If they can knock that off by, say, 5 to 10 points a game, they'll be more competitive throughout the season. Offensively, I have my doubts. They got Jordan Howard, so if he can stay healthy, he'll be their lead back. And that's all I got on them as far as offense.
Well, it'll be between Jordan Howard and Matt Breida. But Breida's obviously an injury risk at all times. Ryan Fitzpatrick, you mentioned, we know the Ryan Fitzpatrick formula. He will come out hot. He will start to falter. And then Tua will obviously take over after that point. At tight end, they made no changes, sticking with Mike Gesicki, who is a, average to above average tight end in the NFL. Their wide receiving core, I mean, they actually have decent pieces here. Devontae Parker, Allen Hurns, Albert Wilson, and Preston Williams. But again, we're talking about decent pieces. We're not talking about superstars. Devontae Parker has been that superstar who's never actually become a superstar. Allen Hurns, I think, Allen Hurns and Albert Wilson both have been underrated wide receivers in the league for quite some time. And Preston Williams had a breakout season last year. So we'll see what happens there. But again, it's another team that struggled to put together an offensive line. They drafted Austin Jackson at tackle. Currently, Ourlads, for whatever reason, has Julian Davenport listed as the starting left tackle. That's not going to happen. It'll be Austin Jackson's. Eric Flowers playing guard. They stole Ted Karras away from the Patriots, and Ted Karras is, I would say, an average center. Michael Dieter at right guard and Jesse Davis at right tackle. Again, there's not a lot of – there's just not enough there.
Yeah, definitely, especially not on the offensive line, and I'm not going to say disdain, but your befuddlement of Ted Karras' consistency and effectiveness throughout last season, well noted. Not really the guy I want anchoring the offensive line. Probably needs another year or two under his belt before he becomes a stalwart at center, let alone just, if you want to put him on an upper tier level of good centers in the league. Flowers, I can't say much about Flowers other than just documented history. He's been moved all over the offensive line in his career from guard, tackle on both sides. It's a guy you root for to hopefully maintain some consistency at one position, but it's like just when they think they found something that he's good at, he falters somewhere else and just becomes a detriment.
So I've got the Dolphins at 5-11, with one lock victory and 5 lock losses. Those lock losses, week 1 at the Patriots. I just don't, again, both teams even, and the game is at home for the Patriots. I don't see the Patriots losing that particular game. However, conversely, week 15 is a lock win against the Patriots in Miami because the Patriots don't play well in Miami. And if Tom Brady couldn't get the job done in Miami, I don't see how Jarrett Stidham is going to get the job done in Miami. Other victories here for the Dolphins: at the Jaguars in week 3, hosting the Chargers in week 7, hosting the Jets in week 10, hosting the Bengals in week 13. Their other lock losses, the Seahawks in Miami, at the 49ers, the Chiefs in Miami, and then at the Bills to finish the season. And there you go. Every other game. So, I see them with only 1 guaranteed win and 5 guaranteed losses.
Yeah, I can't argue with that. Upside, they may stumble to 7-9. Sometimes these teams come in, especially late in the season, if the Dolphins are pretty much just a 2-win team and take them for granted, like my beloved Eagles did last season, and choke the bed.
We didn't mention this when we didn't mention this when we were talking about the Jets, but there are all these little anomalies in the schedule this season. Week 11, everyone but the Patriots are off. That's their bye week in the AFC East. And the Jets and the Dolphins play each other on either side of the bye. So week 10, the Dolphins host the Jets. And then week 12, the Dolphins are at the Jets, with week 11 being the bye week. Those anomalies are not just for the Dolphins and the Jets. They're all through every single team this year. It's strange to see, and there are reasons why they were scheduled this way.
Yeah, the global pandemic and everything, and if there's a delay to the start of the season, it makes things easier to move around, especially if you have to move. The first 4 weeks of the season is what's going to be crucial, weeks 1 through 4, because everybody's playing exactly 2 home games and 2 road games. So it makes it easier to move those weeks around or shift those games to bye weeks if necessary. Because I believe a lot of those teams that do play each other in the first 4 weeks, in some of those matchups, those pairings have the same bye week during the season. So that's why that was done.
Well, let's get to the second place team in the AFC East. And when we talk about the second place team, we're still talking about a team with a losing record. The first place team is going to benefit greatly from the weakness of this division. And in previous seasons, that has been the New England Patriots. And in this season, it is not the New England Patriots that benefit from that. They will finish in the second place spot, but with a record of 6-10. I have been consistent with this prediction. I wanted to change it for this podcast, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. The one thing I did change from previous, if you've heard me as a guest on other podcasts, I did change one of their lock losses. So they are now down to 5 lock losses, 3 lock victories. You've heard 2 of their lock victories: week 1 at home versus the Dolphins, week 17 at home versus the Jets. Their other lock victory, week 5 hosting the Broncos, which is right before the bye week. But they are, without Tom Brady, this team has issues. And really where their issues lie is once again on the offensive line. Are they just not making offensive linemen like they used to, James? I mean, I feel like this is the same story every year. Every team is missing an offensive line. Here's the Patriots. Isaiah Wynn at left tackle, still unproven, still has yet to play a full season. Joe Thuney, probably the best guard in the NFL if you listen to Pro Football Focus, playing on a franchise tag that did he sign it? I don't know if he has or not. If he hasn't, I'm sure he will, but I don't think they're going to give him an extended deal, which is giving them a whole bunch of cap problems. We'll come back to the center position. I want to talk about that. Shaq Mason, another really good guard at the right guard position. Marcus Cannon, who 2 seasons ago was Pro Football Focus's best right tackle in the NFL. Funny how when the best tight end ever leaves the team, how quickly that right tackle became one of the worst right tackles in the NFL. It just boggles the mind. Now back to the center position. The Patriots did nothing to address this position, even allowing Ted Karras and James Ferentz, both of their backup at that position, to leave the team. And they're going with David Andrews, the previous starter. David Andrews is great. He's a solid center. He's an above average center. He may even be a great center. However, the reason why David Andrews missed last season was because of blood clots in his lungs. James, remind me what's happening here in the year 2020? Are we not dealing with a virus that attacks the lungs?
Yeah, pretty much.
If there's anyone that is susceptible to COVID-19, it's David Andrews. There is nothing behind David Andrews other than a center that they drafted in the 7th round, Dustin Woodward. I am extremely scared for the Patriots offensive line.
As well, you should be. But Andrews aside, it is a solid offensive line. I'll give you that. And yes, at times over the previous couple of seasons, it looked probably better than it was because you had TB12 back there who was getting rid of the ball in under 3 seconds. So almost any offensive line looks great when your quarterback from snap to throw is quickly getting rid of the ball to targets who can get open. And therein lies my second issue with this offense, the receiving core. And projected right now, you're looking at some combination of Edelman, Sanu, Harry, maybe Lee and Bird figure into the mix, I guess, an occasional Slater if he makes the roster. I mean, these guys getting open consistently for your young quarterback is going to be a problem. And I think a lot of your offense is going to fall on the shoulders of Michelle and James White in that backfield.
I'm glad you brought up the wide receiving core here, James, because the Patriots have done this with their wide receivers all through the Brady era. The problem is Jarrett Stidham is not Tom Brady. Mm-hmm. And you have a combination of older veterans who have proven their worth over time, but they are, let's face it, Julian Edelman, Mohamed Sanu, they're more towards the end of their career than the prime of their career. You have a rookie who, depending on what stories you believe, lacks some sort of toughness. And the reason why he was drafted is because he's a tough physical receiver. It's not because of his speed. It's because of his physicality, but he lacks a certain amount of toughness in regards to injuries. That's concerning. Marquise Lee and Damiere Byrd both have great potential, especially as speedsters. I know Marquise Lee very well. He was a member of my fantasy team a couple years ago and was phenomenal for me. However, both of those two receivers are made of glass. So as we continue down, and then I love Jacoby Myers, undrafted free agent, but again, he's an undrafted free agent. I don't expect much out of him. He might have a little better chemistry with Jarrett Stidham than he did with Brady. That was something, if I was going to, look at the preseason from last year, Jacoby Myers really had a lot of success playing with Jarrett Stidham at quarterback, but remember the talent that he's playing against at those particular points in time. You're talking about against the 2s and the 3s of the other team on the defensive side of the ball. So now you're taking those guys, you're promoting them to face the 1s. We'll see how they'll do. But Brady, his problems with Myers was always, you're not in the right spot. You'd always see Brady pointing where Jacoby Myers was supposed to be, not where he ended up being. I know.
Step too fast, step too slow. It's always one of those things with veteran quarterbacks and younger receivers.
Now, the tight ends, the Patriots did address the tight end position in the draft. They didn't address it with guys that I thought they would. But after looking up the two particular gentlemen that they drafted, Devin Asiasi and Dalton Keene, I do have some faith that maybe we didn't necessarily draft Rob Gronkowski and the football player Hernandez. Forget about the off the field Hernandez guy, but the on the field Hernandez and Rob Gronkowski combo. I don't know if we've gone that far, but I do think Devin Asiasi is an upgrade at the tight end position, despite the fact that our lads has Matt Lacoste listed as the starter. That won't last. And Dalton Keene is a guy that my son actually is super high on, playing an H-back role. Maybe he can fill in at fullback. James Devlin retired. They did end up bringing in Dan Vitale as a fullback type. And they also still have Jakob Janssen, the foreign born player on the roster at the fullback position. Dalton Keene, I think, provides a little more versatility in playing tight end, H-back, fullback type role. Devin Asiasi, a better pass catcher perhaps than what the Patriots currently have on the roster at the tight end position. There's some things there. And Jarrett Stidham, I think, is at least as good as a Brian Hoyer, a Matt Castle, name a Patriots backup over the few years. They're all sort of average type quarterbacks. I mean, we're talking about, when we list the quarterbacks 1 through 32, we're talking about a guy that maybe is above 20, just hovering above the 20 mark. I think that's Jarrett Stidham. And if you have a strong enough defense, and this Patriots defense was really strong last season, and I think they got better this season, I think the Patriots can be okay. Yeah.
Your offensive coordinator is pretty much going to earn his paycheck this year with his quarterback situation. Now, here's a question I do have for you, because it's something I've been wanting to ask you since offseason started. Do you think they bring in a particular quarterback, superstar, former league MVP who's still sitting out there in free agency?
No. And the reason why, twofold. One is the money. The Patriots could make a few moves to free up money to bring in that particular superstar that you're referring to. But two is the attitude of the superstar quarterback. And whether it's fair or not, Cam Newton has been labeled as a guy who does not put in the work and is not known. He's the guy that puts the towel over his head and frowns and pouts on the sideline. He's the guy that one of the most famous pictures of him is, there's the football, dive to get the fumble in the Super Bowl, and he doesn't. That is his perception. That's the perception of him that's out there, the public perception of Cam Newton. Now, Cam Newton could be easily a very different player behind locker room closed doors. Patriots don't know that. And unfortunately, due to the way that the virus has prevented any sort of visits and things of that nature, the Patriots aren't going to get to know the real Cam Newton. So I don't see Cam Newton joining the New England Patriots. And if you're talking about the other guy whom we've had conversations about in the past, who's been out of the league for, is it 5 seasons now? That's the biggest hurdle for him to overcome. He's been out of the league for 5 seasons.
2016, yeah. Well, yeah.
So it's, any upgrade at the quarterback position for the Patriots, I don't necessarily think is enough, doesn't give them enough juice for the squeeze.
Even if it says the difference between 3-4 games actually put you in the playoffs.
Well, we'll get into this a little bit later, but 3 games would maybe put them in the playoffs.
Okay.
And I think that's about it. I think that's all we'd get from either of those two quarterbacks. And does 9-7 really I mean, do I really want my team to finish at 9-7? No. Okay, so there you can see that we talked about Cam Newton. First, let's talk about the details of this deal with the New England Patriots. Cam Newton reached a 1-year deal. It's incentive-laden, according to ESPN's Adam Schefter. And the NFL Network's Ian Rappaport adds in it can be worth up to $7.5 million. Now, I had seen on the bottom line that he had passed the physical in March. And Brady didn't announce that he was leaving the Patriots until April, which I thought was kind of weird. So I did a little bit more digging. And actually, it was a physical conducted by the Panthers that he passed in March, qualifying him as fully healthy. It wasn't a Patriots physical. So don't be misled by some of the reports that are being put out there about the Patriots had a physical with Cam Newton in March, because that's not true. I still wonder just how he's going to gel. And so my overall thought process on Cam Newton, yes, he's an upgrade to Jarrett Stidham, but by how much? Jarrett Stidham knows the system. He's been in the system now for over a year. He's going into his second year as a quarterback on the New England Patriots roster. Cam Newton doesn't know the system. He's a different style of quarterback, even from Tom Brady. And there's going to have to be a few changes made to the way that this offense runs through a quarterback like Cam Newton. He's a little bit more mobile, although with the injuries, maybe he's not as mobile anymore. He's just a different style quarterback than what this team has had for over the past 20 years. So things will obviously change in that standpoint. I don't ultimately know who's going to win out. I would assume it's going to be Cam Newton. As I just mentioned, how much does Cam Newton make a difference? I said 2 games. I actually made it a 3-game difference, moving the Patriots to a 9-7 record. The 3 games, I'm giving them a win week 16 against the Bills, which will knock the Bills down 1 more game. I'm giving them a win at the Jets in week 9, which obviously moves the Jets down to 2-12. I actually don't think the Jets are going to be a 2-12 team. So I'm going to have to adjust the Jets at some point. I'm probably going to have to adjust all of these at some point. But ultimately, I don't think it really makes a difference for the Jets because I don't think the Jets will be a playoff contender. That's ultimately what it is. Are you a playoff contender or are you picking first in the NFL draft? I don't think the Jets are picking first. I don't think they're a playoff contender. And then I give the Patriots another win week 14 at the Rams. And as I've said, I think teams with new pieces in place will struggle to gel in the early goings. The Patriots still have lock losses at the Seahawks, at the Chiefs. That's week 2 and week 4. And then I see this tough stretch. Week 7, 49ers at the Bills. Week 8, Ravens. Week 10 at Texans. Week 11. That stretch with that Jets game, I see them going 1-4. And if that happens, then they can run out at the end of the season, and even that lock loss at the Dolphins might change with Cam Newton. But again, the Patriots in Miami don't usually do well. 9-7 would technically put them in a tie for the wild card. I have 3 other teams in the AFC going 9-7, but due to common opponents, the Patriots miss the playoffs. And so my thought that I shared with James earlier still stands. Cam Newton, Colin Kaepernick being added to this team doesn't make this team a playoff team and ultimately puts them just in the middle of the pack and makes them just another team. And that's not really going to help them going into the future, especially with a guy who's playing on a prove-it year kind of contract and will most likely end up leaving at the end of the season because the Patriots aren't going to pony up for that contract. We'll see. I don't know.
Just looking at the schedule here, and the say Stidham is the day 1 starter. You have 2 of the first 4 games as guaranteed losses. The other 2 games, you have a lock win against the Dolphins week 1 and a win week 3 against the Raiders. Let's say Stidham stinks the bed and they blow both those games, and you're going to play Denver, which you have a lock for, 0-4, with the bye week coming up in week 6. What do you think happens then?
I think they make the switch to Brian Hoyer.
Ooh.
which, yes, doesn't necessarily instill any more confidence in me. But quite honestly, if we start let's put it this way. If we start the season 0-4, I want them to tank for Trevor at that point. It's all about losing as many games at that point than it is about trying to win any games.
Win anything.
Yeah. You cannot start the season 0-4. Not this year, not with the way that I see. I have been big on saying that this season, I thought a lot of the teams were going to go 8-8. I thought this was the perfect parity season, just based on what has occurred in the world with the virus, sort of preventing teams from being able to practice with each other. Doing all those things that they need to do on the field to gel. We'll talk about this obviously more when we talk about my former quarterback on his team and how I think that they're going to have trouble sort of getting started. It's going to be sort of a bumpy start. And then once they do get started, it's going to be tough to stop them. But with that, and just with the way that most of these teams have been constructed, there are certain teams that I see that are elite, and then there's everybody else. And I know we've been saying that for years in the NFL, but this year, and maybe it's because I don't have that quarterback on my team, I see it even more so.
Yeah, it used to be that this team was a lock for the AFC title game. Basically, the last 20 years, you just had to figure out who they were going to play. This year, not so much. But briefly on your defense, we haven't gone over personnel. I do see some pieces here. Dante Hightower's returning, linebacking core, still strong. You got Chase Winovich, Jawan Bentley, John Simon. Front line pretty solid with Guy, Bo Allen, and Wise. Secondary, however, after Stephen Gilmore and the McCourty twins, I'm not high on Patrick Chung, but weren't one of the McCourty twins thinking about retiring this offseason? What persuaded him to come back?
So let's talk about all these pieces. We'll start with the secondary. Sure. The secondary is actually probably the strongest area on this Patriots defense. And a lot of that has to do with Defensive Player of the Year, Stephon Gilmore. But Devin McCourty's contract had to be renewed. And there was talk that maybe he would walk away. Jason McCourty still had 1 year left on his deal with the Patriots. I didn't see any way. If there was a McCourty twin that should be retiring, it's Jason, not Devin. I actually think Jason's lost a little bit of a step. JC Jackson is a very underrated cornerback in the league. He is very, very good. And Jonathan Jones is the fastest man on this particular team, and is our nickel guy. So their secondary is super strong. Patrick Chung, I think, has definitely lost a step. I'm very surprised that even with his plea deal in the cocaine case, I still don't even know what necessarily happened there, that he's not suspended for any length of games. But while they lost Deron Harmon and a couple of other safeties from their group, they added Adrian Phillips, who I think is going to be a huge upgrade. They drafted Kyle Duggar, a guy that a lot of people were like, who the heck is Kyle Duggar from this small school? All of us who follow the draft knew who Kyle Duggar was. That was a steal for the Patriots in the second round at the safety position. Their linebacking core, I obviously love Dante Hightower, but I actually see him as a trade piece because I'm a big, big fan of Jawan Bentley, have been for a long time now. I think he's going to be great. And they drafted two kids, Josh Uche and Anthony Jennings, who I think are going to be huge contributors right off the bat. Chase Winovich goes into his second year, looking for his second year bump. And the one guy that you didn't mention on the defensive line, Adam Butler, the Butler did it. Actually was one of the sack leaders on this team, coming in as the rush D tackle during passing downs. Adam Butler is another underrated guy in this defense. The Boogeymen are back, even if that was really Kyle Van Noy's thing. I will still call them the Boogeymen. And I'll also say that they lost their Boogeymen status basically as soon as they started calling themselves the Boogeymen, which was disappointing. But this is a strong defense, and really this is what the Patriots model is going to be for this season. Your defense is there to win the game. Your offense is there to not lose the game. And they're going to have to try and find some running lanes. Sony Michel, we learned that Sony Michel can't run without a fullback. So Sony Michel, with Dalton Keene, hopefully, Dan Vitale can stay healthy, can run behind a fullback and, regain some of that form we saw in his rookie year. Damian Harris is a guy they drafted in the 3rd round last year, whom a lot of Patriots fans are excited for. And James White is a guy that, for whatever reason, never gets a run, but really should. James White, their receiving back, who I think can do a lot more, is still there. So that is the Patriots formula. Defense to win the game, offense to not lose it, run the ball as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think, Pod, and you can attest to this because you're my age range, for younger fans who didn't know what Belichick looked like or his teams looked like when he was in Cleveland, this is what this looks like. If you didn't remember Belichick coaching in Cleveland, as far as how much those teams had to fight and claw their way through a season, you're about to find out right now, because that's what this roster screams of.
Well, it really reminds me of that 2001 team after Bledsoe went down. Brady was a guy who could not throw the deep pass. As a matter of fact, you go back and look at Brady's first year, and I'll call that his first year of throwing the ball when he brought the team to the Super Bowl. It was all dink and dunk, can't throw past 10 yards, just keep moving the ball, control the ball as much as you can, and let that defense win you the game. All right, enough about the Patriots. Let's talk about the team that's going to win the AFC East and benefit from a weak division, and that is your Buffalo Bills. We have been telling you about the Bills defense for years, basically because Buffalo Rob wouldn't let us, not hear about the Buffalo Bills defense. But I think more people are now coming to realize that the Bills defense is for real. They made some key additions, I think, that makes them even stronger. Mario Addison, Star Lutulele, Jerry Hughes. Obviously, Ed Oliver was drafted last year in the 1st round. They've got Josh Norman to help them out in the secondary to go along with Tre'Davious White, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, their linebacking core, and AJ Klein, Tremaine Edmonds, Matt Milano. Nothing to sneeze at either. This is a super, super strong defense.
Absolutely. It's talent littered all over the field, all 3 levels, playmakers galore. The linebacking core, actually, I believe, was the strength of this defense last year, and it pretty much returned just about everybody. Additions to the secondary, look, Tre'Davious White, solid all-pro guy. I think somewhat underrated for what he can do. Like you said, Micah Hyde coming in there at safety. I don't put too much stock in the Josh Norman signing. I think that this pretty much is his last year. I don't trust him outside playing corner. If you bring him in a sub-package situation, have him playing some type of free man zone, or if he's covering someone in the shallow flats, cool, but I don't trust him more than 10 yards down the field. But the defense looks great. I can only see them getting better this year. Now, if something happens and they slip up and take a step back, that would probably not be in their best interest. But the formula for them playing good defense last year had to deal with their offense because of ball control and running it. And this year they added some weapons for Josh Allen. So I believe that they'll go as far as his arm takes them this year, because teams are going to be geared up to try to force him to throw the ball more.
Well, and really, you mentioned that the ball control and the running the ball. I actually am looking at this, and everyone's been talking about Josh Allen and his lack of deep ball accuracy. It was one of the worst in the league last season, and he just liked to sling it. And he's come out and he said he doesn't want to be captain check down. But we can knock Josh Allen's deep ball accuracy all we want, but The Bills actually went
fair.
out and did something about it. They got
They
Stephon Diggs, one of the best deep ball catchers. And I've mentioned this about Brady. Brady never had deep ball accuracy until he had Randy Moss as his wide receiver. So you bring in Stephon Diggs, and now Josh Allen's accuracy throwing the ball deep is only going to increase because of Stephon Diggs. I just don't understand knocking the guy's weakness without mentioning the fact that the Bills went and did something about it.
Well, because last year it was justified considering he had John Brown, who you could argue is a deep ball threat, but John Brown's all of, 5'10" at best?
Yeah.
Stephon Diggs is a legit 6'1", maybe 6'2", and I could be fudging that a little bit. It's probably 6'1". But you got a taller receiver who can run deep as opposed to a guy who's the same
actually
height
listed as 6 foot.
Stephon Diggs?
Yeah. But
okay.
But he's definitely much
Brown,
taller than John Brown. John Brown is
right.
listed at 5'10", which means he's probably 5'8".
Which is the same size as your average cornerback. So your 50-50 balls throwing deep downfield are literally 50-50 balls if your receiver and the DB are the same height. Not to mention, you also had Cole Beasley, another short receiver, and I can't remember who the other receiver was they had playing for them last year. But
Isaiah McKenzie or Foster? Or Zay Jones?
Zay Jones. All three of the receivers last year were 5'10" or shorter. So throwing deep is not really in the scheme of the offense unless these guys are screaming wide open, like the nearest defender is 5 yards away. That was rarely happening last year, and yet he still tried to give them a chance and throw the ball deep. I don't blame him for taking those shots, but after a while, it's kind of one of those things is like, if the guy's not wide open, you probably shouldn't throw the ball.
So you mentioned running the ball. They still have Devin Singletary, TJ Yeldon. They drafted Zach Moss. They acquired Tywan Jones. And there's a couple of other guys on their depth chart. Now, I could tell you what I think about it, but why don't we let Buffalo Rob tell you what he thinks about it and his thoughts on the team offense. They bring just about everyone from an offense that averaged 19.6 points per game with some notable exceptions. Bills lose Frank Gore to the division rival Jets, but replace him with rookie third-round pick Zach Moss, who should be viewed as an upgrade, who was probably the best at breaking tackles in the draft, as Singletary was the year before as a rookie. Bills finally got their big ticket item and acquired Stephon Diggs to start in place of Isaiah McKenzie, a massive upgrade. Diggs might be the best receiver in the league when it comes to separation, which is great when you have a quarterback that can fire the ball in, but can be a bit inaccurate at times. A Diggs, Brown, Beasley wide receiving core is impressive. Dawson Knox gets a whole offseason as the unquestioned starter at tight end. If he can clean up his drops, which were not around in college, he will be an asset. Also, Bills return all 5 starters on a deep offensive line, better run blockers than pass blockers. Really, though, all comes down to Josh Allen, who made a big leap from year 1 to year 2. Early reports from the various Bills satellite camps is that J.A. has looked like he has been improving. If the Bills can add 3 points per game and 30 yards per game, they're a top 15 offense, which seems very doable. Let's see here. Defense, the stalwart of the team, looks to be returning most of their starters here as well. In the secondary, the only change seems to be the Bills putting Levi Wallace on the bench in favor of veteran Josh Norman. Before you poop on Norman and his terrible year in Washington, remember that they used him in man coverage mostly, and in Buffalo, he'll be asked to play cover 2-3 zone stuff, which is what he was doing with McDermott in Carolina when he earned that big contract and made some Pro Bowls. Same defense. The rest of the secondary consists of 3 potential Pro Bowlers. The linebackers lose Lorenzo Alexander, but replace him with another guy familiar with the defense in A.J. Klein. The big changes come on the defensive line with the losses of Jordan Phillips and Shaq Lawson. Neither were starters, however, and the Bills add another former Carolina defense in Mario Addison, who should be a better pass rusher than Shaq, and replace Phillips with Quentin Jefferson, who can play both inside and outside, and along with Ed Oliver was in the top 10 in rushing the passer from the defensive tackle position. Should be fun to watch them on third down. Bills defense was a top 5 unit the last 2 years, and no reason to think they won't be in that range this year again. This is the best Bills defense in the McDermott era if Ed Oliver makes a leap. Special teams, can't forget about that key third part of the game, James. Bye-bye Housh money. Bills drafted a kicker in the 6th named Tyler Bass. kick their ass Seabass, who has the leg to kick in Buffalo, routinely hits 60-yarders. Punter is a clown show, however. Bills did add special teams monster Tyler Mankiewicz. So there you go. He says the Bills will go 11-5 and win at least one playoff game. James, I've got them going 12-4 with 4 lock games: home against the Jets week 1, home against the Rams week 3, home against the Patriots week 8, and home against the Dolphins week 17. And lock losses, none. I don't see a loss that I can consider a lock because they are home against the Chiefs. I think that game is one. Obviously, I've marked it as a loss, but I do think the Bills have a chance, especially since it's at home. It is early. It's in October. It's week 6. So they won't have the weather necessarily to help them out. And a November game hosting the Seahawks week 9. The Seahawks are not a very good away team. And that's another game that I could see that I have marked as a loss that the Bills could actually win. I mean, I don't think the Bills are getting enough credit in the national press, James. I think the Bills are a solid team that are going to go far this season.
Solid team, yes. Go far remains to be seen. Playoff football, and look, that game they lost to the Texans last year was literally a tale of two halves. And for the first half, they looked like the best team we've seen all season. And in the second half, they looked like those guys had never played football before in their lives. That's pretty much where my concern comes in, because most of these guys are returning from that playoff game. They make the playoffs again. There's experience. And, yeah, experience is sometimes overlooked or thrown to the side or whatever have you. But I think that experience of being there and having done it before does give them a little bit more, especially if they can find themselves into their first game being in a divisional round as opposed to a wild card game. Either way, I think they win it at least one playoff game should they get that far. The losses on here that I see that you have that would probably worry me, the December game at Frisco and the Week 5 game at Tennessee. I'd be greatly concerned about those 2 games. The Titans game I expect to be a physical defensive battle. Both those teams should probably beat each other up, which could lead into them losing the next week against the Chiefs. 49ers game, again, that's out west. Depending on how the 49ers bounce back from that Super Bowl loss, that could be very dangerous.
Very true. Very true. But ultimately, we still see the Bills winning this division, and they will be going on to the playoffs. Remember, the playoffs are expanded this year. There's an extra wild card team. Only one team is going to get the bye this season. And that's going to change a lot of things, including the way that the next round would be seeded. And just to give you sort of a tease, we'll be doing a postseason prediction show, but that's probably where I see the Bills having some trouble. Because the way I have things seeded, the Bills are going to have some issues with their second round matchup. First round matchup, maybe not so much. Their second round matchup, probably not the team they want to see. That's going to do it.
I'm guessing you probably have them facing one of those 2 guys who won MVP awards last year.
That's going to do it for our AFC East preview. How'd we do? Send us an email, nextfanup@gmail.com. You can always tweet us at NFU Podcast. I know we haven't been active, but hey, come back to us. Tell your friends about us. You can listen to us wherever great podcasts are heard. We are literally everywhere. Apple, Google, Spotify, you name it. We're there. Pandora. Apparently a lot of people like listening to us on Pandora, James. It's a little odd. Really? Not a lot of people know that you can even listen to podcasts on Pandora, and yet we have a good audience on Pandora. So, hey, Pandora, how are you?
I didn't know either.
Listen to us wherever you can listen to podcasts. Tell a friend about us. Tweet us. We got a Facebook group. I've seen a lot of people liking the Next Fan Up Facebook page. We'll try and be a little bit more active there when we can. Like I said, I'm working more for less, and I'm trying to sneak this stuff in my free time. There's the AFC East. We'll have more divisions for you as the month progresses. There you have it.
How you doing? Trying to figure out who's going to play? Yeah. So are we.